Thank you, and again, welcome to our witnesses. In your scenario, Shockwave, I know you mentioned that you really didn't have time to do long-term planning, but given diplomatic or lack of diplomatic efforts, could you shed some light on that? Because you mentioned in this scenario that Iran and Venezuela would cut off supplies. What, in your opinion, can we do to help maybe prepare for these kinds of disasters that may occur, and what steps can we take? Was there anyone talking about that at all in this role-playing?
Yeah, when we, at the end, remember, we're getting presented with facts, and we don't necessarily have an explanation for why the particular fact has unfolded. It's just presented as a fact, and so we were given the fact that Iran and Venezuela were doing X, and we had to then, quickly respond so the president could respond to the American people. When we stepped out of our roles, I think a number of people from sort of the military side, talked about the fact that how we build relationships, how we maintain relationships with various regions of the world, with various leaders, is absolutely essential. There's not a single problem we confronted in this scenario had a perfect answer or a single answer. All of it was about things you do over a period of time, in some instances a very long period of time.
I think, Ms. Solis, that I draw a contrast between the way we deal with countries that really don't have our economic interests in their hand and those who do. And when I was a commander in the Pacific, we could deal with countries in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, some other problem countries, and we weren't completely dependent on them for oil supplies, so we could be a little sophisticated in our dealing with them. We didn't have to turn to big, expensive, hair trigger military options right off the bat. By way of contrast, when we're dealing with countries who are controlling important parts of the world's oil supply, we militarize our policy almost by default. So what we feel is if we can drop the oil intensity of the United States economy, that is the amount of oil to produce every dollar of GDP, and as Mr. Sensenbrenner said, we dropped that after the first oil problems in the 70s and the 80s, but then it leveled out, and we are as dependent as we all know now. If we can do a combination of conservation and domestic alternatives, get that down again, then we're not as subject to being jacked around by these events and by these countries. So it really is a case of lowering our dependence on this as an economy to give these people who are in these shockwave events a little more flexibility, so that they can have time to round up international support, so that they can use other maneuvers. And it's just getting them on that hair trigger by the increased demand and the increased dependence that makes it so brutal when you come to one of these crisis situations like a pipeline that pops or a misery. So it's really that dependence that we need to work on.
I raise that issue because we've seen a lot of climatic changes in Latin America, and I want to talk specifically about Mexico, because we do import a lot of petroleum from Mexico. There was a very bad flood that occurred in Tabasco, where they have a really large refinery. And I'm wondering, things like that occur, we may not feel immediately, but they will have an impact a couple of months down the line. And I just would hope that our leaders, our policymakers, would start thinking about how we can help provide assistance to our friends, democratically elected governments, that we should be helping to nurture, and doing things in a manner that conserves, that's energy efficient, that has a less negative footprint on the environment. And I just want to throw that out there. And then CAFE standards, just quickly, I had a meeting with some folks from the Automobile Alliance, and they were trying to explain to me that, well, it's really about the demand out there, the consumers' thirst for these pickup trucks and what have you. And I just wanted to ask if you could comment on that, Ms. Browner.
I just want to remind everybody that the EPA, which I had the opportunity to run for 8 years, does not handle CAFE. So I am not familiar with the program from a regulator perspective, but obviously have studied it. It is handled by the Department of Transportation. I think the Admiral, as he said earlier, what's important about the CAFE proposal is that it is car to car. It is not manufacturer to manufacturer. And so the opportunity for, the American public to continue to look at the vehicles they want is preserved. Having said that, again, my experience as a regulator does tell me that you set the standard, and you know what? Good old American innovation and ingenuity rises to the challenge. I mean, when Congress in 1990 banned chlorofluorocarbon, CFCs, widely used in refrigeration, people, in this body and in the Senate said, oh my God, what are we going to do? We're going to have to drive our cars without air conditioning. We're not going to have, sort of life as we know it. Well, guess what? Once Congress said it's gone on a date certain, a company saw an opportunity, brought a technology to the market for less money, faster than anyone envisioned. When I set the tailpipe emission standards for diesel engines, it was one of the last things I did when I was in office, one of the things we could require was not just clean sulfur fuel, but also that there be a catalytic converter put on big diesel trucks and diesel cars. It didn't exist. The scientists, the engineers were still figuring it out. Once they knew there was a guaranteed market on a date certain, they figured it out pretty darn quickly. And so I never, ever want to underestimate American innovation and ingenuity. We have a long history of rising to the challenge.
Good point. Thank you very much.
Would you like to add to that, Admiral? You have your... Yeah, just one thing. So as I agree completely with Ms. Brown, and I've talked with the same car companies, and they're saying that American people don't want more efficient cars. They want more powerful cars with more cup holders, and therefore we have to give it to them. I think, as Ms. Brown says, they're underestimating what they can produce. I think they're way underestimating the American public, who understand that we all need to have cars that are more fuel efficient, even if we have to sacrifice that top-end performance that we have. But they're waiting to be told, let's all do it together. Let's set a standard that applies to everybody, rather than one that's uneven. And I also, frankly, I don't have a lot of sympathies for these car companies, because the price of that oil that we are using does not reflect the full price of the American troops who are doing all this business around the world. If you factored in the real price of that oil, it would be huge. And frankly, I'm sorry, it's not up to the car companies to make that judgment. It's up to the leaders of the American people to make that judgment.